Episodes 4 mark a powerful turning point in the series. What began as subtle tension beneath professional interactions evolves into a strategic, internal, and deeply revealing battle. At the center is the unsettling realization that power can be held by someone who is also being consumed by it. Heyman shifts from a controlled strategist to a threatened manipulator. His quiet move to begin documenting against Karine is not administrative. It is preemptive warfare. The audience witnesses how narratives can be constructed long before accusations ever surface. Karine's strength in these episodes is found in her restraint. Her silence is not weakness, but wisdom. She does not react to the swirl of criticism, reassignment, or isolation. Instead, she observes, listens, and documents. Here, the series theme becomes vivid. Not everything deserves a reaction. Sometimes the most powerful response is composure. These episodes highlight a core message of the series. True authority is rooted in integrity, not control. Heyman clings to authority through manipulation, while Karine, stripped of position and voice, retains moral authority through integrity. The morning sun struck the city's skyline with sharp clarity. Karine arrived early at the foundation. The corridors were quiet, almost reverent. She walked with calm purpose, her laptop tucked under her arm, the encrypted files inside it like a guarded truth waiting for its moment. Every step she took felt deliberate. By mid-morning, her phone vibrated. "Are you ready?" the journalist asked softly. Karine paused before answering. She looked through the glass into the hallway at people moving about, oblivious to what was happening. "Yes," she said. "The community, the files, the timeline, they're ready, but please, let's do this carefully." Later that afternoon, Karine met Vanessa and the journalist at a small eatery near the village. The setting was casual, but the work was not. Papers were aligned with precision, devices were checked, and timelines were matched with testimony. Community statements were cross-referenced with financial records. Budget lines were matched with relocation notices. Offshore transfers were traced against land surveys. Everything was verified. Everything was documented. Vanessa looked at Karine. "Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Karine nodded. "That's why we waited." As the evening settled, Karine moved through the village. She listened. Children spoke about playgrounds, suddenly fenced off. Farmers described survey flags appearing overnight. Elderly residents recalled promises of preservation that now felt fragile. Every voice added what no spreadsheet could carry. She recorded carefully, dates, names, locations. Each story reinforced the evidence. Each memory strengthened her resolve. This was no longer about exposing corruption. This was about protecting people. Prophetess Miriam's words echoed in her mind. Courage, discernment, timing. She realized this was the timing. That night, back at her desk, the room lit only by a single lamp, Karine reviewed everything one last time. Financial records, signed approvals, interview footage, land maps, and email trails. This was the complete picture. And now Karine understood something clearly. She had not been gathering evidence to fight Heyman. She had been gathering evidence to protect the truth. She closed the laptop gently. Tomorrow the truth would move beyond her hands. And once it did, it would no longer need her voice to defend it. The next day was Saturday, and Vanessa had arranged a meeting with the community. By late afternoon, Karine was at the community center in the village square. Villagers, journalists, and select allies gathered. Karine addressed the group calmly but firmly. "We have the facts, we have the evidence, and we have each other. What is being planned threatens your homes, your families, and your future. But the truth cannot be hidden forever. Together, we will ensure it is known. For such a time as this, our voices will be heard." The villagers responded with quiet nods, murmurs of agreement, and a shared sense of purpose. The moral authority of Karine's words carried power beyond politics. It carried community, justice, and courage. By evening, Karine returned to her hill overlooking the village. The sun was setting, painting the coastline gold and crimson. She whispered again, "For such a time as this." This time, the words were not just preparation, they were in action. Somewhere in the city, Grant began piecing together the truth. Haman's control faltered. The first threads of exposure were visible, irreversible. The confrontation, long predicted, had begun. And Karine stood at the center, calm, courageous, and fully aligned with purpose. Meanwhile, Haman sensed the shift. He noticed unusual activity in the IT department, phone calls, and even HR personnel whispering. Something was happening, but he could not trace it immediately. Haman's frustration boiled over. He ordered legal teams to prepare documentation against Karine, HR to continue subtle containment, and allies to suppress her influence. Grant sat alone in his office, the city humming far below his window. Files lay open across his desk, budget summaries, approval sheets, relocation reports. Documents he had signed without hesitation months ago now felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. A call earlier that morning from the Prime Minister still echoed in his mind. The tone had been measured, but the questions had not. "Some information crossed my desk, Grant. I think you should review your recent approvals carefully." Since then, an uneasiness had settled over him. Patterns he had not noticed before were now impossible to ignore. Numbers that seemed routine now appeared excessive. Language that once read as procedural now felt intentionally vague. His phone rang. He rubbed his temples before answering. "Yes?" His secretary's voice came through gently. "Sir, Mrs. Vanessa Grant is here to see you. She says it's important." Grant froze. Vanessa? After months of silence, no calls, no messages, no reason to appear. And now, today? "Did she say what this is about?" "No, sir. She only asked if you would see her." Grant almost declined. Almost. But something told him not to. "Send her in." Vanessa entered quietly. She was composed. She did not carry a folder or notes. She did not come as an activist, an accuser, or even as his former wife. She came as something else, a moral voice. Grant stood awkwardly. "Vanessa, I didn't expect..." She raised her hand gently. "I won't be long." She remained standing. "I was doing my devotion this morning," she said calmly, "and a verse would not leave my mind." Grant said nothing. "Ecclesiastes 8:11, she continued. "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, the hearts of men are fully set to do evil." The words hung in the air between them. "This is what happens," she said softly. "When wrongdoing goes unchecked for too long, people stop fearing consequences. They grow comfortable and careless, confident that nothing will happen." Grant shifted in his chair. She wasn't accusing, but it felt like she was describing his office. Vanessa continued. "There's another one. Numbers 32:23. Be sure your sin will find you out." Grant swallowed. She walked slowly toward the window, looking out over the city. "And Luke 12:2. There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not be known." She turned back to him. "Grant, this isn't about scandal. It's about accountability before God. Leaders don't fall because they meant to do wrong. They fall because they sign things they never questioned. They trust systems they never examine. They allow things to move forward simply because they are busy." His eyes dropped to the papers on his desk. She had not mentioned Haman. She had not mentioned Karine, but Grant felt exposed without being accused. Vanessa's voice softened, but her words did not lose their weight. "You've always believed what you were doing is good, that it isn't corruption. But truth and corruption cannot live side by side forever. One eventually exposes the other." Grant felt the air in the room shift. This was no longer a conversation. It was a reckoning spoken quietly. "For years," she continued, "you tried to pull me into it, asked me to sign papers without questions, to support decisions that harmed people under the disguise of helping them. You called it development, progress, opportunity." Her eyes held his. But it was never that. Grant's mouth felt dry. He had no immediate defense, no explanation ready, because somewhere beneath the titles and meetings and procedures, he knew she was not exaggerating. "Stop what you are doing, Grant. God is watching." She took a slow breath. Numbers 32:23. "Be sure your sin will find you out." Grant swallowed hard. Silence filled the room. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded louder than it should have. Vanessa did not press further, and she did not wait for a response. She simply turned and walked toward the door, but before leaving, she paused with her hand on the handle. Without turning around, she said quietly, "Whatever is hidden, Grant, God has a way of bringing it into the light. It's mercy when it happens before it's too late." And then she was gone. Grant did not move for a long while. He remained seated, staring at the space where Vanessa had stood, feeling as though something far heavier than accusation had just passed through his office. Conviction. He reached for the nearest file, the same document he had skimmed earlier, the same signature he had dismissed without concern. But this time, everything in him slowed. He read carefully, deliberately. Every line, every number, every clause. He was no longer reading as a leader, processing routine paperwork. He was reading as a man confronting the weight of what he had overlooked. What once seemed ordinary now felt strategic and dangerous. The numbers didn't align. The language was subtle but intentional. What he thought was cooperation now revealed itself as manipulation. His grip tightened slightly on the paper. This wasn't a mistake. It was a scheme. Haman was no longer working with him. He had been working around him and against him. His voice dropped to a whisper, edged with disbelief and rising dread. "What have I signed? Who else knows?" The shift did not come with noise. There were no announcements, no sudden disruptions, no visible cracks in the system. On the surface, everything continued as it always had. Meetings were held, reports were filed, and decisions were executed with the same practiced efficiency. But beneath that calm exterior, something had changed. Senator Grant felt it before he could fully explain it. It was not just suspicion, it was awareness, a slow, unsettling realization that something had been unfolding right in front of him, hidden not by secrecy, but by familiarity. What had once seemed routine now felt deliberate. What he had once approved without hesitation now demanded scrutiny. And the truth that unsettled him most was this: if something was wrong, it had passed through him. Not just Haman, him. That realization stripped away the comfort of authority. This was no longer about leadership or control. It was about accountability and the quiet fear of exposure. So Senator Grant made a decision. He ordered a silent internal audit. No announcements were made, no department-wide alerts were sent. Haman's name was never mentioned. The instruction moved quietly through the finance department. Pull archived data. Go back further than usual. Review everything. At first, the process appeared routine. Files were opened, spreadsheets examined, and transactions reviewed with professional detachment. It was the kind of work that rarely raised an alarm, until it wasn't. The inconsistencies began small. Numbers that were slightly off, but not enough to trigger immediate concern. Budget allocations that seemed inflated, but just within acceptable limits. Adjustments that could easily be explained away as operational shifts. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. And once the pattern was seen, it could not be unseen. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Offshore transfers, strategically buried within legitimate transactions. Relocation funds, subtly redirected, masked as necessary adjustments. Financial movements that, on the surface, appeared clean, but beneath, revealed precision. This was not an error. This was designed. Late into the evening, Grant stood alone in his office, the dim light casting long shadows across the files spread before him. The silence in the room felt heavier now, as though the truth itself had weight. He reviewed the documents again, not as a leader skimming reports, but as a man searching for clarity in something he could no longer deny. Every page confirmed it. This had been intentionally happening over time, and he had not seen it. Across the building, Heyman felt the shift, though no one had spoken a word. The environment had changed in ways too subtle to name, but too real to ignore. Conversations seemed to pause when he approached. Responses came slower. The usual rhythm of control he maintained now felt disrupted. Something was moving beneath the surface, and he was not directing it. Back in the audit room, the pressure continued to build. An auditor, reviewing a sequence of transactions, paused. His expression did not change, but his focus sharpened. Then he spoke, calmly, almost casually. "We'll need the original authorization emails." A brief silence followed. From Kareen's department. Kareen. Files were retrieved. Secure systems accessed. Layers of encryption opened one by one, revealing not chaos but order. Her documentation was precise and meticulous. She had seen it, not in fragments, but in full, and she had preserved it. Grant stood before the screen, reading through her timeline slowly, absorbing not just the information, but its implications. Kareen knew, and suddenly, the decisions surrounding her made sense. Her removal from key meetings, her reassignment to less visible roles, the gradual silencing of her voice within the system. It had not been incidental. It had been intentional. She had not been overlooked. She had been moved, because she was a risk. Grant leaned back, the weight of realization settling deeper than before. This was no longer a question of isolated wrongdoing, and whether knowingly or not, he had been part of it. The following morning, there was no delay. Heyman was called in. The message was simple: come now. When he entered the office, the atmosphere felt different. The ease that once defined their interactions had vanished. There was no casual exchange, no controlled charm to soften the moment. Grant stood near the window, silent, composed, but no longer uncertain. Heyman offered a greeting, measured and familiar. "Senator, sit." The word was firm, cutting through any attempt at normalcy. There would be no performance today. Grant turned slowly, placing a file on the desk. Then another, and another. Each one represents a piece of the truth that could no longer be avoided. "I know," he said. The room held its breath. Heyman's expression remained controlled, but beneath it, calculations were already shifting. "I'm not sure what you don't." Grant's interruption was quiet, but absolute. He began to speak with precision. Offshore transfers, a file opened. Inflated budgets. Another page turned. Relocation distortions. Each statement was supported. Heyman's composure did not collapse, but it tightened. His responses slowed, measured more carefully now, as though each word required calculation. "These matters can be explained." "No." Grant stepped forward, his voice steady, grounded in certainty. "They can't be explained cleanly." And that was the problem. Because this was no longer about what had been done. It was about what could not be undone. A thick, heavy silence settled between them. Then Grant spoke again, his tone shifting. "Your actions have raised too many questions." A pause. "I could terminate you immediately, Another pause. But you know too much. That truth hung in the air, binding them both. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It was a shared crisis. Grant moved closer, his voice lowering. Now we have to decide what happens next. He looked directly at Heyman, no longer searching for answers, but demanding alignment. How do we fix this? How do we contain it? Because right now, there are too many questions. The room held still. Even the silence felt structured. Because both men understood what had just been said. This was no longer about right or wrong. It was about survival. Heyman did not respond immediately, not because he lacked words, but because, for the first time, words were no longer his strongest advantage. He had built his position on control, on anticipating outcomes, shaping narratives, staying several steps ahead. But now, the ground had shifted, and he felt it. Senator Grant was no longer unaware or passive. Heyman's mind moved quickly, recalibrating, restructuring, searching for ground that could still be claimed. This was not the moment to deny or resist. This was the moment to adapt. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. He was less assertive but more strategic. Then we changed the narrative. He watched Grant's reaction for resistance, and finding none, he continued. We don't respond to the questions. We replace them. Grant did not interrupt, but his expression did not soften either. So, Heyman pressed forward. Let us present the infrastructure deal publicly, in the form of a banquet. The idea settled into the room. It will be convincing, Heyman continued. Controlled and structured. He stepped slightly forward now, not reclaiming power, but repositioning himself within it. We invite everyone. He began to list them, not randomly, but deliberately. The Prime Minister, senior government officials, department heads, international investors, audience, media. They will see unity. They will see progress. They will see alignment. They will see justification. They will see what we have been doing. A pause. Is not corruption. The room grew quiet again, but this silence was different. Because now, there was a plan. Grant did not respond immediately. He turned slightly, pacing once, slowly, his mind processing. Not just the strategy, but the implication. This was a redirect. A public display to cover a private fracture. He understood exactly what Heyman was offering. Control. And yet, control was exactly what he needed. Grant stopped, turned back. His expression was unreadable. Would this fix the problem, or only delay the moment it could no longer be hidden? The answer hung unspoken, but the decision was already forming. The decision did not linger. Once it was made, everything moved quickly. What had been spoken in a quiet office, measured, controlled, deliberate, now had to be executed on a scale that left no room for hesitation. Once conceptual plans became operational within hours. Because in spaces of power, delay is weakness, and neither Grant nor Heyman could afford to appear weak. Within the first 48 hours, the structure began to form. Teams were assembled, not publicly but strategically. Individuals were selected not just for competence, but for discretion. Every department involved understood the unspoken rule. This was not just an event, it was a statement. The venue was secured first, not simply for its size, but for its message. It had to communicate influence without explanation, power without apology. A space where presence alone would reinforce authority. Grand ceilings, layered lighting. Every detail was chosen to ensure that once guests entered, they would not question what they were seeing. They would believe it. By the end of the first week, the narrative was already taking shape. Media teams worked behind closed doors, crafting language that sounded organic, but was anything but. Every phrase was designed to reinforce stability. Every message aligned to suggest progress. Interviews were scheduled, press releases drafted. Key talking points were distributed carefully to those who would echo them. Nothing was left to chance, because repetition creates belief. Meanwhile, invitations began to move. Not all at once, but in waves. Those with influence received early notice, giving them the impression of exclusivity. Others followed, reinforcing the scale of the event. By the second week, attendance was no longer a question. It was expected. Internally, the system adjusted. Departments aligned, staff briefed, movements controlled. What had once been fragmented now appeared unified, at least from the outside. Communication became sharper, shorter, and more intentional. But beneath the coordination, there was unspoken and unresolved tension. Senator Grant carried it quietly. In meetings, his tone remained firm, his posture steady. But there were moments, brief and unguarded, where his focus drifted, where the weight of what he knew and what he was choosing not to confront pressed against his composure. He was building something visible while avoiding something hidden. Heyman, on the other hand, became sharper, more present and more controlled. He moved through the process with precision, ensuring every element aligned with the narrative they had constructed. His confidence had not returned fully, but it had adapted. He was no longer operating freely. He was operating carefully. And then, there was Karine. While the system prepared for display, she prepared for truth. Her work did not stop, it intensified. Each day of those 3 weeks, she refined what she had already discovered, cross-referencing data, securing copies, organizing timelines so clearly that no interpretation could distort them. She was not rushing. She was preparing for a moment, because she understood something they did not. A stage can control attention, but truth controls impact. By the final week, everything was aligned. The narrative had been accepted. The event had been anticipated. The system appeared stable. From the outside, it was flawless. A leader regaining control. A nation moving forward. A future unfolding with certainty. But beneath it all, 3 different forces were moving toward the same moment. Grant, seeking control. Heyman, protecting position. Karine, carrying truth. And in just a few days, they would all stand in the same room, not to collaborate, but to collide. The night did not arrive quietly. It arrived with expectation. From the moment the first vehicles pulled up to the entrance, it was clear that this was no ordinary gathering. Cameras flashed, doors opened. Names that carried influence stepped out into carefully positioned light. Every detail had been orchestrated to communicate one message without ever saying it aloud. Power was intact. Control had not been lost. And whatever questions had been forming beneath the surface would not be addressed here. They would be replaced. Inside, the ballroom carried a different kind of silence. The kind of silence that exists where influence gathers. Conversations were measured. Laughter restrained. Eyes observant. Every person in the room understood that they were not just attending an event. They were participating in a narrative. The grand ballroom of the National Hall gleamed like polished crystal. Chandeliers sparkled, reflecting 100 points of light across gold-trimmed walls and marble floors. Flags from every continent lined the perimeter. Cameras clicked softly. Waitstaff moved with practiced precision, balancing silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Standing near the center was Senator Grant. He was composed, wearing authority like it had never been shaken. He seemed focused and calculating, but he was not relaxed. Heyman moved through the room with quiet precision, greeting, aligning, reinforcing the illusion. His smile remained intact, but his eyes moved constantly, tracking reactions, measuring control. Near the edge of the room, almost unnoticed, stood Karine. She was not seeking attention. She was waiting, because she understood something the room did not. Timing is not about when you speak. It is about when the room is ready to hear. And then, Vanessa entered. Their eyes meet briefly. No words exchanged. But an understanding passed between them. At the far end of the room, partially obscured by positioning and influence, stood the hidden advisor, the architect behind what had been set in motion long before this night, watching but not speaking. He was certain that control still belonged to him. Grant steps forward. The room settles instantly. Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate progress. Tonight is not just a celebration, a pause. It is a declaration. We stand at a moment of transformation, where vision meets execution, and where progress is no longer an idea, but a reality. Applause follows. Tonight, we announce the largest infrastructure deal in our nation's history. Let this moment reflect our ambition, our vision, our leadership. Not overwhelming, but sufficient, expected. This infrastructure initiative represents more than development. It represents partnership, growth, and a future we can all stand behind. As applause filled the room, Heyman lingered nearby, smiling tightly, unaware that Karine was observing him as closely as he watched the guests. He had orchestrated his schemes meticulously, yet he had not accounted for the moral and spiritual alignment of the young ambassador before him. He turned slightly. And to speak further on this vision, our new ambassador Karine. When applause waned, Karine quietly and purposefully stepped forward. The room hushed and all eyes shifted. Thank you, Senator Grant. A pause. It is an honor to stand in a room filled with vision, leadership, and opportunity. The room relaxes slightly. Development is necessary. Growth is essential, and progress is something we all strive toward. Heads nod, agreement settles in. And then she shifts. But I have a question. What if development costs more than land? What if it costs people? The room changes. What if progress is being funded by distortion? Karine raised a small tablet. She tapped, and a projection illuminated the hall. Maps, spreadsheets, photographs of displaced families. Every eye in the room tracked the unfolding evidence. The following documents illustrate the truth behind recent projects. These are records, and all of it connected. A pause. To a system designed, not to build, but to benefit. Grant does not move. His confident smile faltered. Heyman's eyes narrowed. He recognized the shift, but could not yet intervene. Senator Heyman stood still, realizing that he had not been leading. He had been positioned and used. Heyman looks forward. The room is no longer a celebration. It is a reckoning. And at the center, Karine. This was not disruption. This was a revelation. Many here have been misled, Karine continued, stepping closer to the podium. But the true architect of this operation has been hidden. Until now. Heyman's face went pale. He shifted, attempting to compose himself, but it was too late. The room had seen. The evidence had spoken. Karine's calm, moral authority had framed the narrative perfectly. Grant's eyes widened as recognition dawned. For the first time he understood he had been manipulated. Heyman's schemes had used him as a tool, not a partner. His pride, his desire for control, had blinded him to the truth. And in that moment, what had been hidden was no longer protected. The silence did not break immediately. It settled. The kind of silence that follows truth when it can no longer be denied. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what had just been revealed pressed down on the room, holding every person in place. Members of Parliament, councillors, leaders, investors, advisors. all suspended between disbelief and understanding. Then the room began to shift. The chairs moved, whispers spread. Phones appeared in my hands. Messages were sent before words could be formed. The narrative that had been so carefully constructed over weeks, months, began to unravel in real time. And at the center of it all stood Grant. His face hardened. Grant's hands shook slightly. His mask of authority had cracked. Heyman attempted to interject, but Karine raised a finger, halting him with silence. Karine turned her gaze toward Grant. "Senator," she said, voice firm, "the truth is now visible. You must decide. Will you protect it or ignore it?" The aftermath was immediate. Parliament and legal teams began moving quickly to investigate. International investors froze agreements. Media outlets flashed the story across every platform. Across the room, Heyman no longer blended into the background. Eyes found him, attention fixed on him. What had once been obscured by influence was now exposed by clarity. He did not attempt to speak, because there was nothing left to control. Still seated, he adjusted his posture slightly, as though regaining control of something already lost. But his silence betrayed him, because now every connection led back to him. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Heyman looked toward Grant, searching for assistance but finding none. "Sir, you need to come with us now." Heyman understood now that this was no longer a negotiation. He slowly stood. And as he was escorted out, the room did not react with shock, only with recognition, because what had been hidden was now visible. The system was collapsing, not structurally, but morally. And just like that, Heyman was no longer part of the room. Conversations fractured, alliances questioned, certainty gone, and in the midst of it all, Grant remained, still. Then he stepped forward, not as a host or a strategist, but as a man standing in the aftermath of his own decisions. The room quieted again. Not because they were asked to, but because something in his posture demanded it. This should not have happened. I have no defense. And the responsibility, a pause, does not end with those who have just left this room. Eyes shifted toward him, because now he was including himself. I approved what I did not fully examine. I trusted what I should have questioned. The words did not come easily, but they came clearly. And for that, a pause, deeper this time. I am accountable. No applause followed because this moment was about truth. He turned slightly. This administration will not move forward by hiding what has been exposed. We will correct it, and we will rebuild with transparency. This was not the same authority he carried earlier. The room did not erupt. It did not resolve. But something else happened. It settled, not into comfort, but into truth. The room had emptied, but the night had not. Long after the last voice faded and the final footsteps disappeared down the corridor, Senator Grant remained. The grand ballroom that had once carried power, influence, and carefully constructed control now stood in quiet stillness. Chairs sat slightly out of place. Glasses remained untouched on tables. The light that once reflected confidence now revealed something else. Grant stood for a moment longer than necessary, as though his body had not yet caught up with what his mind had already accepted. Then, slowly, he turned and walked out, but with the weight of realization settling deeper with every step. The drive home was silent. There were no phone calls, no instructions, no attempts to regain control. He realized that he had nothing to manage. When he entered his home, the stillness felt different. There were no advisors here, no systems to direct, no narratives to shape, only the truth. He removed his jacket slowly, placing it down without care for where it landed. The tie followed. Then the silence returned. Grant walked toward his study, but stopped before reaching the desk. Because he knew This was not a moment for strategy. It was a moment for honesty. He sank into the chair, his hands resting loosely, his gaze unfocused. The images of the night replayed, not as events, but as revelations. And in that quiet space, a realization formed. He was not in control. He never had been. There was a sovereignty at work, beyond his decisions, beyond his authority, beyond the systems he thought he managed. He realized Vanessa's warning had been true. He had ignored the voice of conscience, the voice of truth. Pride, ambition, and a need for control had led him to this collapse. Grant leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands now clasped, not in control, but in surrender. He bowed his head. Not as a politician, but as a man who understood that influence does not protect you from error, and position does not excuse you from truth. Lord, a pause, unfamiliar but sincere. I thought I was leading, but I was blind. I trusted what I should have tested. I approved what I should have questioned. If you allowed this, a pause, then there is something I need to learn. Grant leaned back slightly, his breathing slower now, his thoughts clearer, not because the situation had changed, but because his posture toward it had. Days passed. Parliamentary inquiries intensified. Grant publicly admitted wrongdoing, stepping down from his role. Political allies withdrew. Deals froze. Media coverage scrutinized every decision, every project, every signature. Grant's final confrontation was internal. On the balcony of his office, he looked out at the city he had once controlled. Pride and ambition had failed him. Compromise and manipulation had unraveled his legacy. He whispered to himself, "For such a time as this, I should have seen." Grant stepped away from public life. Some said he disappeared. Others said he was rebuilding privately, learning humility the hard way. His name would always carry the weight of what happened, but also the possibility that he chose honesty when it mattered most. Haman's fate was different. His influence vanished. His networks dissolved. The power he once manipulated could not protect him from the truth he tried to bury. Obsession had consumed him. And in the end, he was left with nothing but the ruins of his own schemes. The headlines had quieted, but the work had just begun. The nation was still processing what had happened at the banquet. Panels debated ethics and governance. Communities revisited policies that had once felt too distant to question. And in the coastal district once labeled underdeveloped, life moved with a new dignity. Vanessa walked beside her, no longer warning but affirming. "You see now why you had to be there," Karine nodded. "I thought I was sent to represent progress. I didn't realize I was sent to protect people." They stopped outside the small prayer house, where prophetess Miriam waited. Miriam smiled before Karine spoke. "You have done what heaven required," she said. "Now, you must learn what heaven is building next." Uncle Michael arrived days later. He did not speak much. He simply embraced her. "I was worried for you," he admitted, "but I know the God I served would protect you." Karine smiled. "I was never alone." Michael looked at the village, the coastline, the people moving freely. "You didn't just expose corruption. You restored what they were about to lose without knowing it." Karine sat alone one evening by the shoreline, where she had played as a child. The waves moved steadily and peacefully. She realized something profound. The battle had never been about exposure. It had been about alignment between her calling, her courage, and her obedience. "For such a time as this," she whispered again. But now, it was no longer about crisis. It was about purpose. She returned to the city months later, not as an ambassador of influence, but as an advocate for ethical development, community voice, and moral leadership. People listened differently now, not because of her title, but because of her integrity. And wherever she went, the story followed as testimony. A testimony that truth, when handled with wisdom, does not destroy. It restores. This story was never merely about politics, corruption, or public exposure. It was about how purpose is clarified and courage is formed under pressure. It was about what happens when power replaces discernment and silence replaces truth. Through Grant, we see that a person can hold power, status, and influence and still be quietly used by the very systems they believe they control. Power without discernment becomes a tool for manipulation. Through Karine, we learn that silence is not always a weakness, but can be a strategy. It is wisdom, watching, learning, and gathering truth until the right moment to act. Her journey reveals that God often positions people long before He reveals why, using mentors, warnings, and quiet preparation to get them ready for a moment they could never have anticipated. When the truth finally emerged, it did not destroy what was good. It exposed what was hidden, so that what was good could be protected and restored. And ultimately, the series shows that true authority is not rooted in control, titles, or visibility, but in integrity, moral alignment, and the courage to stand when it matters most. And maybe that is where this story meets you. Not in the banquet, not in the exposure, but in the question. What will you do when truth finds you? Will you defend what is broken? Or will you surrender to what God is revealing? Because in every generation, God raises a voice. God exposes what is hidden. And God gives an opportunity, not just for judgment, but for repentance. Karine's story reminds us that you do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to control to have authority. And you may already be positioned for a purpose you do not yet understand. Because sometimes you are placed for such a time as this. So, this is more than a story. It is a reminder. God is still watching. God is still positioning. And God is still calling His people to stand for such a time as this. Blessings from Jamaica.